Back with another edition of Office Hours featuring Tadpull and goVirtualOffice. I'm Chrissy Allard, the marketing manager, and today we're going to be talking about item management and profitability. So do you guys want to start with introductions? Chris, I'll let you go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, thanks for taking the time, everyone. Excited to be chatting with you guys here today. My name is Chris Davis. I'm a solutions architect over here at Tadpull. And yeah, really excited to be chatting with you guys about item best practices and ways that we can leverage that data on the e-commerce side. And obviously excited to be joined here by Todd and team as well. So Todd, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So my name is Todd Parrish. I am the Director of Managed Application Services and a partner here at goVirtualOffice. Our team works on optimizing your NetSuite account and getting NetSuite simplified so that it can get you where you want to go.
All right, well, let's dive in. So our first question is, what are some of the best practices when it comes to item management?
You know, I could probably go first on this one, Chris. I'll take this one. So some of the things that I look at with item management is really like talking about your profitability is really first off looking at what available data pieces you have. And I know we've talked about data before, but really is going to another level, say looking at your location. You know, like where are my products at? And a good example is this, is that you may have multiple locations throughout the United States that you're selling from, but are you tracking the cost of those different locations? So if I'm selling it out of my California 3PL, what is my cost there as opposed to my cost that's on my East Coast 3PL? And just knowing that, so how am I selling that product and where am I focusing my marketing efforts? You know, I may be doing different marketing campaigns on the East Coast as opposed to West Coast. Well, that's going to affect your profitability and the pricing that you have on that. Second point on that is really, are you tracking your landed cost? Because you have that cost with your products, but are you taking into account freight? You know, there's been a lot of, you know, volatility when you start looking at freight, fuel prices, et cetera, et cetera. So like in NetSuite, we're able to track landed costs. So are you being able to look at that profitability with the landed cost to be able to say accurately that our profit margin is this? And if you're not doing that, you may be getting stuck. And then the last point on that was really the sales by customer category. You know, are you tracking your sales by those customers? And what is your price level for those customers? And are you above your average price, or are you below? As it shakes out as a company, is it making sense to even be selling that product to a certain customer category? And I think that's those 3 points there will really help you like manage your items with the long range view, bring profitability with those items.
Yeah, Todd, I think that's super helpful. And I think when we think about this more from like an e-commerce manager standpoint, I think a lot of this comes down to similar to what you were getting at, but a lot of this comes down to basically just knowing your best sellers. And that happens both in terms of like quantity sold, but also in terms of revenue and then margin as well. So knowing that not only from like a product perspective, but also from a product line perspective. So if it's, you know, your t-shirts, for instance, versus your pants or your hats, for instance, those kinds of things are going to be super important. But knowing that, I would say like basically all the way down to the actual SKU level. So knowing that from both like a size variant and a color variant perspective can also be super imperative as well, at least as far as actually merchandising your website, merchandising your email campaigns, merchandising paid campaigns, those kinds of things too. The other thing as well that I would also keep in mind is knowing some of the velocity of these SKUs too. So if you know how quickly some of these SKUs are selling, that's obviously going to impact a lot of your marketing calendars, for instance. If you know that there's a product that's going to be scheduled to be in an actual email campaign coming up that is moving too fast, that can obviously be a good way for you to actually adjust your calendar there. So more than anything, I think making sure that marketing and e-commerce teams have access to that data and know how to actually use it is going to be super important for sure.
Yeah, and I think that last point is a really, really good point, because you are seeing, you know, lots of customers like on NetSuite. NetSuite has tremendous growth. A lot of people running NetSuite and getting that source of truth of data, but being proactive enough to start including those marketing people in operations meetings and vice versa. And how do you get that level of visibility up to the point where people in marketing can see actual data, can see the trends within NetSuite? So you have a joint, you know, one thing that we do from time to time is we'll create a custom tab within NetSuite, and to be able to build dashboards that, you know, have cross department, you know, importance, to be able to see like top trending items. And so in just working off that so people can actually see the data, and they go through so much effort to get that data into NetSuite, but really have to evolve in their mindset of, hey, we have all this data, marketing needs to see it, salespeople need to see it, executives need to see it, those, people in procurement. So it's a really good way to get a tab to say, these are our key areas or key data points. Let's publish this across the company so everybody can see that actionable data. And it's taking that next level of executives to say, okay, everybody get in the same room, proverbially, on a tab and look at that data together.
Yeah, totally. I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I think too, like, a lot of this comes down to just actually building the habit, right? And that can be as simple as just like, hey, when we meet on a weekly basis as a marketing team, we're going to look at that new screen in NetSuite, for instance. And so a lot of this can kind of start with the basics. We're like, hey, we at least just got to build the muscle memory and build the habit that when we're making marketing decisions, we're at least considering our operations data in NetSuite.
Yep, perfect.
Yeah, I think breaking down those silos can be really powerful, especially when, those people aren't normally in the same room looking at the same data. Those dashboards can really bring transparency to everybody without even having to take time to communicate it. How do you guys recommend keeping track of your stock levels? What are some tips you have on that?
Yeah, well, I think Todd, I would definitely be super curious to hear you weigh in on maybe some of the more specifics of this. But I mean, long story short, I think ERP is basically the answer here. NetSuite obviously being a great one that I think we're all big fans of. I think like from an e-commerce standpoint in particular, a big thing is making sure that we're keeping those stock levels consistent between our e-com platform and our ERP or our NetSuite instance as well. Because, long story short, again, if we're going to be actually building that into our cadence as far as considering some of that data, we need to make sure it's accurate, right? So if, for instance, we're using a Shopify front end and a NetSuite back end, we definitely want to make sure those two platforms are talking to each other so that we're not either sending an email campaign out for a product that looks like it's in stock in Shopify, but actually isn't in NetSuite, or for instance, maybe we're merchandising the homepage in a similar scenario. So I think long story short, from an e-com perspective, making sure that that e-com platform is ingesting in that data is going to allow us to make, really great and smart decisions.
Yeah, and you're right on the ERP. And I go back to, everybody talks about what's your source of truth. And to me, and I believe that the companies that do this best know what their source of truth is, and trusting in that source of truth. And it takes a lot of time and energy. We talked about marketing and like operations, how they need to be talking and what they want to market. But if you have it set up, so, use the example of Shopify, with NetSuite, and a lot of times you use Soligo as that middleware, to connect those. And you can go ahead up and set your flows with Soligo to be able to say what real time, what inventory do we have for this different item. And that's really powerful, because you can go ahead and, like NetSuite, I mentioned locations before, I'm like, hey, I may have a location set up in X amount of the products. Let's say I have 100 of this SKU. 70 of those I have set aside in this location to be shared with Shopify that can be sold D2C or direct to customer. But I have 30 set up in another location that's reserved for my B2B customers. So one, knowing what the availability is for like your segmentation gets really powerful, so you can protect, because you got to feed different beasts in your type of business a lot of times. And then also it's just knowing what your vendor is also, because when you start looking in stock, the reality is that in stock is a major theme. And I was driving, I live near Madison, Wisconsin, and I was driving through the Beltline the other day, and a big billboard for a car dealership said literally, this vehicle in stock. And it was a huge billboard. And I was just like, wow, it's crazy. I'm like, that is the selling point. Well, it's really important to be able to have that data, say one is in stock, but the reality is not everything is going to be in stock. A good example is yesterday, I just bought some luggage for my son, and I bought it from a online vendor, and I clearly knew that it was out of stock, but it's expected to be delivered, shipped by December 1st. Which is more than fine, because I only need to buy Christmas as an example. Well, if it is 12/1, well, that fits. I can go ahead and buy it. I'm done. I checked that off my list. So having that information in your ERP to be able to say, this is my vendor, this is their their actual lead time that we've had in the past, you can start to project some of those dates. So it's not just in stock, but when is it going to be in stock? Now, the less area of that. And when I mentioned as vendors, like in NetSuite, we're actually, there's algorithms to determine a vendor ranking. So when I'm going to buy my items, I'm going to look at that vendor ranking and see what their actual lead time is and compare to like their actual delivery date versus what they expect that delivery date. So when you start to add all those things in, you almost got to go back 2 or 3 layers back to say, okay, who's my vendor? Are they on time? When is that product going to get here? Where am I going to have it shipped to in a location, and then parsing that data out? So I know that's a lot, but this is a really, really big topic and a really big determination on which company, which customer is going to go with which company.
Well, yeah, and I think Todd, what you just illustrated is a great example of why it's so important to keep your marketing and your operation teams in such close contact, right? Because especially if somebody is buying a product with an expected ship date, for instance, that's going to be sometime in the future, well, that obviously is going to then impact how we're going to communicate to that customer and basically how we can continue to set those expectations, making sure that they aren't, for instance, misaligned on when that expected shipping day is going to be,
Yeah.
Are they going to have it in time for the holidays, all those kinds of things. So I think it's just
Yeah.
one more kind of feather in the cap, at least as far as making sure that those operation teams, those marketing teams are talking to each other, or at the very least have access to the same data sets.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Those are all really good points. And, we've talked about this a little bit, but with, zip codes and shipping costs and things like that, what are some other strategies that these e-commerce businesses could take to just increase their profitability?
Yeah, well, I'd say this is definitely something Tadpull hangs our hat on a lot of, which basically a lot of this is going to come down to leveraging our own first and zero party data, right? And what I mean by that is basically taking data either from purchase behavior, for instance, or even data that's coming directly from the customer, like at least as far as us asking them, like, hey, what are you interested in? What sizes, for instance, are you looking to buy? Those kinds of things. But long story short, if we can have some of that data that can drive basically creating segments of folks with different either size or color or product preferences, we can then use them to actually make segments or cohorts of customers, and then basically use that information to actually drive the merchandising of that communication, if you will. So what I'm getting at is if you know what those customers specifically are going to be looking for, you can basically market directly to them with those same products, and hopefully, by the way, do so at full price or at a price that is not quite down to that clearance level where you see a lot of times, right, when folks only have, let's say we only have size extra small left. Well, a lot of folks are going to have to then put that on clearance to move it out the warehouse, get some cash injected into the business. But this is a good way that we can basically attempt to sell that either at a less of a discount or hopefully even at full price to be able to preserve some margins there. And then I think the other thing too to keep in mind are what are ways that we can increase cart sizes, either through bundles or different offers, those kinds of things too, because that's basically going to allow us to be more efficient in that shipping cost, which is going to come, to some degree, no matter what, regardless of that actual cost was of that purchase, if you will. So those are kind of the two things that definitely come to mind first, at least.
Yeah, and to me, I'm going to go with a non-traditional answer on this one. A lot of people won't expect is support cases. And to me, a great way to increase profitability is you can ask a lot of companies that are notorious for great customer service that they charge a higher premium. Okay, so one, making sure that your customer service in NetSuite, there's support case functionality. And what's really interesting is I've always called it the canary in the coal mine, because in NetSuite, you can not only track the support case with the customer, getting customer category, getting that kind of documentation, but then also I can track the item and I can process the returns or the credit memos, and I can track that item data, which that item is generally related to a vendor. So now I'm starting to get all of this information, like where are my highest return items? Because every time I have to touch that product, it's costing me money. Okay, well, if it's costing me money, it's affecting my profitability. And so with that data, I'm starting to see on one, okay, is it a quality issue? Is it a description issue? Do I have incorrect information on my product display page about that item? Because one of the things we can do in support cases in NetSuite is track the reason for why are they returning that product? Is it wrong product, damaged on delivery, wrong expectations, et cetera, et cetera. So now I can start to break down, okay, these are my items that I'm getting. Here's the reason why these are coming back. What is the vendor and where is it coming from? So I can go start to look at that and say, well, I have a 3PL in Minnesota that, you know what, 50% of my damaged product returns are coming from that 3PL in Minnesota. Well, now I need to know, my operations teams, we got to go back and talk to what's going on in our 3PL in Minnesota. Is something wrong? Is there something wrong with our description on the product that when they come out, does it have the wrong, measurements on the product, for example? Do I need to start looking at that? So that's why I say it's a great canary in the coal mine to know what's going on in your business. And to me, go back to that dashboard, comment before. To me, one of those things that if I was running a business, I would have what are my top, items that are returned on my support cases, and what are my reason codes for that? Because it really should start to give you a really good insight to what's going on within your company without actually having to talk to people. It's great, don't get me wrong, to talk to people, but you should really start to see quantitatively what's going on in your business and leading to that profitability of that product.
Yeah, Todd, I think that's super interesting. And I really like how you kind of phrase that as far as the canary in the coal mine goes. And I think one other place folks might be able to look for kind of similar insights might be if anybody is capturing like a net promoter score or other ways that people are capturing feedback post checkout. That can be a way to understand if there are issues, to your point, either with a specific product detail page, for instance, or just with a category, those kinds of things too. So basically looking at like essentially mining some of that qualitative feedback they're giving you to see if certain products are coming up consistently with some of those negative scores, for instance. So yeah, I think to your point, if you can identify some of those kind of canary in the coal mine type metrics, that can help you be efficient with how you're, actually capturing some of those insights.
So kind of going back to, product turns and the cost of inventory, how important is it to keep track of all of that?
I'll jump on this one, Chris, and just say that it to me, when I look at it from a very practical perspective on my product turns, a lot of people know that more turns, more money you're making, and stuff like that. That's really important, but it's also important to know so that you can project. If I'm looking at that, I have, or that this turning is turning really high, and I know my lead time. Well, I'm going to be really, really cautious about running, like that as a loss leader, for my promotions. So to me, it's really understanding that what is in supply and demand, and just saying, hey, these are items that are turning really fast, but at the same time, my lead time is really long. So making sure that I'm pricing that appropriately so that we can make sure that, we're going to have enough stock, and just being wise with what our availability is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it would kind of come back to that question as far as like how important is it? I mean, long story short, it's totally mission critical. I think it basically is the foundation of being able to understand profitability, and we're not going to be able to control profitability if we can't understand it. That's for dang sure. And so I think a lot of this, if nothing else, is at least kind of giving the visibility into some of those metrics to then allow your team to be able to make decisions to optimize for profitability or for revenue growth. And sometimes those things are at odds with each other. But again, at least if we can, know that so long story short, we talk a lot here at Tadpull about if you know the score of the game, you can basically impact the game much better. And so I think this is a way that we can kind of know the score, know what we're optimizing for, and basically, again, making sure that we're empowering the people who are in the trenches making those decisions to be able to do so in a way that aligns with the overall business goal, hopefully.
Yeah, and one other thing I just thought about that, in this we have the ability, there's a module to have purchase contracts where you're able to secure pricing for a set amount of time and things of that nature. And that if you are going into that, you're going to be able to start to say, hey, this is my pricing for X, and this is how much inventory I have available to this time. So really setting up that seasonality at times with some of your products.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to like suppliers and product lines and just kind of evaluating that, how often should you do that?
I'll go first on this one, because really it's a good thing in NetSuite to have data and to be able to make decisions upon that in both short term and long term. And to me, I'll go back and hit my tab concept that, if I have certain items that are going out at a less GP than I really want to on that, I should be doing that immediately. I should be knowing that as that sales order is hitting NetSuite, that I have a fairly high volume of items that are going out at a GP less than what I would expect to do that. So I think there's always that need for that emergency red button that's flashing on a dashboard that, wait, we're taking on water. We need to figure out where that leak is. So I think that that's your baseline defense. But then I really do think that, yearly and quarterly, as you look through and, like Chris said, the more data you have, the better you are to be able to project and where you're at and protect your margins where it need to, and just looking at, do we need to do annual price reviews? Do we need to do a quarterly? I think every business is a little bit differently, but it really goes back to the executive level saying, okay, marketing, operations, let's get together and have those conversations so that we can make sure that we have our desired GP set up for those, and then you can monitor and manage that.
Yeah, totally. I think I would totally agree with everything you said there as far as timelines go. And I think just a couple of things I might add would be thinking about different KPIs that you might keep in mind as you're kind of entering through those different timelines. And so certainly I think looking at like return rate, for instance, is going to be super imperative in some of those conversations. I think even looking at, for instance, conversion rate by SKU might also be imperative for those conversations to understand either what specific SKUs or what product lines, those kinds of things are actually converting well, which could then obviously certainly impact, future purchasing and supplier decisions as well. So.
All right, well, I think that kind of wraps it up for today. Thanks for joining us. And if you guys have any questions or follow-up, feel free to reach out to us at the emails listed below. And as always, follow us on social for the latest updates in the next Office Hours episode. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Todd, for all those great tips, letting us borrow your brains.
Thanks, Chrissy.
Will talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Sounds good. Bye.
Bye.